So welcome everybody to our CPD session on Baubles of Behaviour. So we're going to look and talk about behaviour. And obviously that's such a vast subject area. So we'll take snippets of it and we'll put it into the context of sort of early years and education, and look at that in relation to how that impacts other areas. So most of this, as good old CPD often does, will be reinforcing what you know, but giving opportunities for us just to consolidate that and to maybe talk and raise any questions that you may have that come about during the session. So my name's Janet King and I'm the Sector Manager for Education and Childcare here at NCFE. And I'm hoping that this session will help us to explore behaviour in children and young people and the strategies for promoting self-regulation and the connection between that ability to regulate and metacognition in children and young people and in all of us, to be honest. So I'm going to turn my microphone, I won't turn my microphone off because then you might not be able to hear me, will you? But I will turn my camera off so that I can see all of my screen. So Helen, if you can keep your eye on the chat for me, and I will ask if people have got any questions, if there's anything that you'd like to bring up as the slides are moving, as the discussion is moving forward, I'd really welcome you to do that. Helen, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. I was just thinking as well, we'll have some teachers who work with adults as well, so just to have it in our minds to explore some older learner behaviour as well, if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that. And Helen, while you're on, do you just want to say a quick hello to everyone?
I certainly do. Thank you, Janet. So my name's Helen Scanlon. I'm part of the NCFE Provider Development Team. So we support the teaching and learning of the qualifications that NCFE accredit. So thrilled to be here. Hello, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Helen. Okay, so let's have a look. So in this session then, we will explore links between behaviour and learning and the impact of engagement and a state of readiness to learn. We often talk about that sort of being ready. In an early years context, we might talk about being ready for school, which is a term that often grates. But really, we need to be thinking about a state of readiness to learn. And I think that is something that is ever changing, and it can change from 1 hour to the next, never mind 1 day to the next in children and young people's lives and the circumstances that may well be impacting that. So we're going to have a little chat about that. And there are so many factors impacting how we feel, aren't there? We're not going to do justice to all of that in such a short session. But let's begin to reflect on this critically important aspect of development. Our behaviour really does give a snapshot of how we are feeling. And that, as we can all appreciate, affects everything that we do. Okay, so on here, we can see that actually we've got some really important areas, some terminology that I just want to take a few minutes just to talk about. It all begins really within that sort of from birth to 5, and what's impacting our behaviour can go way before that, can be impacted by what's happening during pregnancy, can be impacted by the environment, that physical environment that is that is caused during during pregnancy. So much that we know now that we didn't know or couldn't contextualize and make sense of in terms of neuroscience. We know so much more about trauma. We know so much more about Thrive type approaches and that trauma-informed whole school approach. And if only we could see the triggers and the way things might be building up in children and young people in terms of cortisol and so on, we would have such a greater understanding of how and when to intervene and what the greatest intervention would be. But throughout the early years foundation stage, we talk about children's behaviour. We do that in the context of that prime area of social and emotional, excuse me, of social and emotional development. And that's so important that our students understand that, and that our students have an underpinning knowledge and awareness of what's going on in the brain and what can actually impact from. I'm just thinking of Bron from Brenner now and thinking about what's going on in our immediate environment and what's going on sort of externally and impacting that in those layers. So we need to be mindful of the theory, and we need to be mindful of what children and young people, where they are at, what their starting point is, what their stage of development is, what their personal circumstances are, and how those personal circumstances can impact the way they behave. Because often it's what we see that we respond to as teachers, as early years educators, as practitioners. We respond to what we see rather than what we know, because we have a job and we have to get that job done. So it's very difficult, but we need to keep reminding ourselves of that. We also need to be thinking, I'm just reminded of people like Carol Dweck in terms of that positive mindset and being able to try and encourage our children and young people, and to try and be that individual that uses adaptive pedagogy, that really tries to tune in to those children's needs and the young person's needs. Metacognition. And of course, when we think about metacognition, this is something that, in my opinion, is very closely linked to self-regulation, because unless we can regulate, unless children and young people, adults, unless we can regulate, then actually we're never going to be in that state where we've got that readiness to learn. And that, if you think about Maslow and that hierarchy and that ability to be able, in very straightforward, simple terms, to be able to move through that motivational hierarchy of need, metacognition is actually a state where you're learning about learning, where you're in that absolute state where you're ready to learn. And so for some people, being able to regulate is the key to being able to learn. And that's such a difficult thing to do as a young person. And if you think of a young person, a young child or a young person, or an adult indeed, who may have a learning need or a specified special educational need or disability, then that might well be impacting all of these abilities, then it's a very, very difficult thing to try and tune in to their needs and to make sure that adaptive pedagogy is taking account of all that personalised need. One of our key jobs as educators is to motivate, to aspire, and to drive, to bring about a state of resilience. And by resilience, we're talking about that ability to adapt, that flexibility, that compound flexibility, to be able to sort of evolve and reflect and change and adapt to what's going on when problems arise, when situations are causing stress, or when change, just any change is afoot really, and we have lots and lots of change in an educational environment. So all the way through our teaching and learning, from the early years right the way through, we are looking and focusing on making sure that actually we remember to tune in to the whole child. That's so, so important. So, beginning with the early years, we can look at the emerging skills that contribute to metacognition and healthy dispositions for learning. A key aspect of education is creativity. And creativity in terms about thinking divergently. Thinking is often referred to as thinking outside the box, and being solutions focused. All of those things can only happen when somebody is feeling okay, when somebody's emotional, mental health is okay. Because again, any sort of creases in that will show in behavior, and that needs to be addressed before any real learning can take place. So let's start by exploring that early years foundation stage with that in mind. There's a significant emphasis placed on the characteristics of effective teaching and learning. The third characteristic focuses specifically on such thinking, and it is the responsibility of all those working with children to ensure all experiences, opportunities, activities, and educational programs challenge children both physically and mentally. Thinking of EYF at the early years foundation stage 1.5, that states that when planning and guiding what children learn, practitioners must reflect on the different rates at which children are developing and adjust their practice appropriately. And of course, if we're thinking about different rates, if we're thinking about different stages, then we're thinking about that whole child, and we're looking at the social and emotional development, and we're thinking holistically as well, right the way through the curriculum in terms of how is this child engaging, how are they interacting. Let's think about the behavior, let's raise any issues and things like that. The three characteristics of effective teaching and learning are playing and exploring. So children investigate and experience things. They have a go. All of the things, the reason for bringing in the curriculum here is that all of the things that we are encouraging and working towards with young children will not happen unless a child is actually feeling safe, secure, and balanced, if you like, that we've created a safe and secure environment where children can express themselves and where we tune into children and support them skillfully with strategies and techniques where that's not the case. Another characteristic of effective teaching and learning is active learning, where children concentrate and keep on trying if they encounter difficulties and enjoy achievements. Now, these characteristics of effective teaching and learning, yes, they've been taken from an early years curriculum, but they actually resonate with teaching and learning at any level and at any age in terms of that participatory element and aspect. And how can we concentrate? And how can we expect children to try and encounter difficulties and enjoy achievements if actually they're in a state where they cannot regulate, and therefore typical behaviour will be anything but conducive to teaching and learning? So creating and thinking critically creating and thinking critically is one of the effective teaching and learning characteristics, where children have and develop their own ideas. They make links between ideas and develop strategies for doing things. These are all the aspects that we have decided in our wisdom through the early years foundation stage that are creating those healthy dispositions to learning. And yet every single one that we've talked about so far will not blossom, will not grow and develop if children are not feeling in a sort of content, safe, secure way. And that will result in behaviour that we will deem inappropriate. And it is inappropriate to what we're trying to achieve. So I'll be interested if people can start thinking in the chat about maybe where they have seen this, where they know about individual learners and circumstance, or children and young people's circumstance, and actually how that's impacted the teaching and learning, and the children and young person and adults, the individuals' engagement and interaction with learning. and it becomes less and less important, and it becomes more and more of a sort of appealing option and an easier option for disengagement. And we're in a situation, I think, currently where we really need to address issues. We hear and read all the time, don't we? I was talking to somebody quite recently about suspension of a child in Key Stage 1, younger end of Key Stage 1. This is child with recognised SEND. Now, if we don't have the strategies, if we don't have the skills, if the teaching assistants don't have the understanding and the knowledge and the support to be able to give that child what that child deserves, then the behaviour will escalate. And that behaviour will be a form of communication. We know this. And yet our answer is very often to actually, get to a state of escalation that is so distressing for both the child, young person, and the rest of the learners, that suspension seems to be the only answer. There is something fundamentally wrong. And I think if we also then consider rising cases of known mental health issues that we are aware of in education, well, across all society, but thinking of education for a moment, then we have got all of these issues to also be aware of, and we need to make sure that we have created what in England in the Department for Education we talk about a broad and balanced curriculum. And sometimes I have to sort of take a deep breath and reflect there and think, what do we mean by broad and balanced? Because it often refers to just an educational broad and balanced series of learning. So I think broad and balanced really needs the strategies, the skills, a really strong pastoral element, a really good understanding of alternative provision, and giving children the opportunity, children and young people, all learners, in fact, the strategies to be able to regulate and to be able to feel that sense of belonging and value and respect within the classroom environment. But that doesn't mean to say that it's easy and straightforward for the teaching staff, because it absolutely is not. And if we haven't got the techniques and the strategies, or we're in a situation where it's an inconsistency of support staff, for example, is often the case, then we're not going to be able to tune into those children. We're not going to be able to meet their needs, and they deserve to have their needs met. SEND is a particular concern as well, because we are seeing a rising number of children and young people with SEND in our classrooms. And I think in the chat somebody talked there about knowing and being aware of triggers. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And it's that investment in that and going back to tuning in. But of course, every single day, that child is going to feel different. Every single day, those triggers might be impacted. It is so, so hard. So there is no easy solution to this. However, I think one of the key messages is making sure that we are responsible in terms of educators. What do we need? How can we best meet the needs of the children and young people, the adults, the learners that we are working with? And we often, I think, are so busy, and there's often so much to do when we're under so much pressure from an educational point of view, that it becomes hypothetical to say we have a broad and balanced curriculum. Anyway, so thank you for the things in the chat. And Helen, I'm just going to pause. Is there anything in the chat that you'd like to share that's sort of prevalent to our discussions so far?
Yeah, absolutely. We're chatting away here, which is great, and trying to pick up on the things that you're saying about all ages and how it impacts on both young learners and older learners.
Absolutely.
So, using Maslow's been mentioned quite a few times, and it's getting them ready for learning,
Yep.
no matter what is going on in their life, and then it's really hard. And I think for adult educators as well, it's hard to have the support mechanisms that possibly younger learners and schools have that, colleges, universities, training providers, apprenticeships don't have so much, Janet, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think
Mhm.
you're absolutely right. And I think we talk about, being ready to learn, being ready to move on to those next steps, being motivated through education. And the biggest challenge is the fact that we're not necessarily working with the learners at their best, and there are so many issues that are impacting our learners today that we need to learn a lot more about. So it's having those tools, having those skills, having those strategies, and that's not always easy. And resource issues are paramount, aren't they, in terms of making sure children and young people receive the best care. And I speak to a lot of committed teaching assistants. They're just coming to mind as from that discussion there, Helen.
Mhm.
And nobody could be more committed to some of the teaching assistants that I've spoken to, and learning support mentors and so on. But they often admit that they're out of their depth, that that they don't have the skills and the techniques, and they find their way. And if anybody's on the call who's in that position, and I will share this little antidote with you in terms of I was I wasn't shocked by that, which is shocking in itself, because we know that this is going on and it's kind of become the norm in terms of the expectation of teaching assistants at the moment. But teaching assistants find themselves working very closely with children with some sort of SEND quite often. And so I spoke to somebody that is a specialist in SEND, and I said, where on earth do you start if you don't know where to start? How can you? Because you can't know every trigger, you can't know every send. You just can't be an expert in send, can you? And he was talking, he just said to me, and it might help you. He said, go back. He said, what I would do is I would look at the code of practice. And I said, oh, what do you mean? And he said, well, just look at those 4 areas. Look at those 4 areas of need, because if a child has got some concern and you're worried from a send perspective, or that the child has got a special educational need or disability, if you look at those 4 areas of need and those categories, it's got to be one or more of those. This is a good starting point. Know that you're starting from this and just get to know that child. But he also emphasized the importance of the fact that, just like any one of us will feel differently from day to day, it's going to be heightened significantly in some of those areas of need for a child with SEND. So it puts an extra layer of complexity on for a teaching assistant or a teacher who is trying. Their main aim will be to drive education, to motivate education. And yet, if we were thinking about the value that we add to individual children through engagement, through interaction, whether that's an educational one or a social one, that to me would give that wraparound of a balanced curriculum in terms of the pastoral need, the safeguarding need. That would be so much more meaningful, I think, for lots of children and young people, and so much more rewarding for teachers as well. So thinking about communication and thinking about how important that is, and how behaviour is actually a way of communicating for our children, and for everybody. The early years foundation stage, of course, reminds us right early on about the importance that educators must know that the development of children's spoken language underpins all 7 areas of learning and development. So what if spoken language is a concern? What if the ability to actually use spoken language is is a challenge in itself. All of these things must be unpicked, because we'll never be able to solve some of these challenges, and so on. And I've just seen in the chat, I'm getting a little bit distracted because the chat is so engaging. It's lovely. Thank you for this. But we've got to remember, haven't we, that we must tune in to that individual, and we must remember what we're trying to achieve and how we can get on that first ring, that first ladder. Is not to persist sometimes with an educational driven outcome, but to actually just reflect on, okay, where are we? What's going on here? And I think in teaching and learning, teachers do it, you do it all the time. You do it quite incidentally. You don't even know that you're doing it, and you're tuning in, and you're being that agile sort of component in the classroom, and bringing that adaptive pedagogy in the way that you address people, and the way that, you know, that you will talk, especially to adults, and the sorts of challenges that adults may bring into a classroom environment. And if you think about, you know, teaching and learning when you're overcoming addiction, I've seen that's popped into the chat. We've just actually had a winter edition of our alumni Illuminate magazine, if you're a member of alumni, and there's an educational psychologist talking on there about just that, about addiction, and it's a very, very interesting article. But in there, he talks about that importance of actually motivating, but respecting and valuing, and making somebody feel safe and secure. So all of those challenges, and yet they're here to learn, says a lot about that individual. So what we know and what we see needs to make sense in how we start this learning. When we think about early years education, again, they talk about higher level functioning and self-regulation being sort of in living together, being entwined. And I think that is something that goes all the way through. And again, you know, thinking of Maslow, thinking of those different levels of understanding, it's not going to happen. We're not in a state of readiness if we're not in a state to breathe properly, to think clearly, and to express ourselves. So when considering understanding the world and going back to the early years curriculum now, there is an opportunity to also consider prime areas of communication and language, with an emphasis on questioning, finding out, exploring, being curious. And all of those things, those learning goals that are assessed at the end of reception year, are all really reliant on that readiness to learn. And again, that readiness to learn is impacted by so many things. And the way that you recognize those factors are through someone's behavior, the way that, you know, somebody's body language, the way that they are sort of sitting at a desk, or the way that they are interacting with the peers, the way that they're looking at you, the way that they are disengaging with the learning, or perhaps they're trying to be disruptive. Perhaps they're making, that's where the energy is going, because actually they're not able to take part and contribute and participate in a level that they feel is equitable. Those are the triggers, and I know somebody has mentioned about the importance of recognizing those triggers, but there are so many things going on in somebody's lives. If only we could see how people are struggling to regulate, you know, by understanding what's going on in the brain. And I think it as part of a pastoral curriculum, I think it would do all learners justice to look at what those very simple elements of what happens when we're feeling stressed, what's happening in our brain. And that might help us to regulate, because we might be thinking about, okay, I recognize it now in myself. So if people recognize that within themselves, they are perhaps able to begin that self-regulation. And we have to bring that to younger children, don't we? We have to make sure that we have the facilities and we have the resources and we have the nurturing co-regulation to be able to make that happen. So here's the sorts of things we're expecting. Children at the expected level of development in communication and language will participate in small group class, they'll participate in one-to-one discussions, they'll offer their own ideas, they'll use recently introduced vocabulary, they'll offer explanation for why things might happen. And you can apply that, can't you, in all aspects of teaching and learning across those age ranges. Maths is a specific area of learning and a key part of STEM. Within the EYFS, developing a strong grounding in number is essential so that all children develop the necessary building blocks to excel mathematically. It's important that children develop positive attitudes and interests in mathematics. Look for patterns, relationships, spot connections, and have a go. And it's that have a go and feel confident to talk to adults and peers about what they notice and what they're doing that is so important here. Provocations and questions reflect scientific engineering, finding out about properties, how things are constructed and made, mathematical and technological thinking, as well as being linked to those characteristics of effective teaching and learning. Effective teaching and learning, and what makes something effective. I wonder if anybody would like to share anything from the chat, or if anybody, I'm just going to pause again, Helen, just to see if there's anything in the chat that is worthy of well, it's all worthy, but of worthy of sharing now at this point in the discussions.
Yeah, something that popped into my head was about the authority of the teacher and the relationship between teacher and learner at different ages. Also what older learners have brought to the relationship in the classroom from their past experiences as well. You know, what did they learn as a child? Worked for them. Quite rightly, somebody's put in the chat here about, you know, getting told off no matter what age you are. Is still attention. So, you know, even using that behavior to get negative contact is something as well, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, when we think about that, there have to be boundaries. So I know in the chat, it might have been you, Helen, when you talked about ground rules and boundaries. Boundaries that are age and stage appropriate, absolutely. Ground rules as young people, as adults that are collaboratively drawn up are also quite useful, and you often see that, don't you, within classroom environments, and that's good, and that's engaging, and you take ownership then of your expectations, and they kind of remind each other, don't they, children, of what's permitted and so
they self-manage it, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. But when you think about somebody who's behaving in an inappropriate way, and is aware that it's not always aware that it's inappropriate, of course, we do know this, but where children, young people, adults, where they know it's inappropriate, then this expression and communication through that behavior is something that we need to note, because there are key messages there that we need to understand and we need to tune into to be able to support those learners in the best way that we possibly can. And I think if we are ever going to support that motivation and that readiness to learn and engage in that wanting to have a go, developing that resilience, and in learning becoming something that's important to an individual, then we first of all need to value that individual and accept them and grow with them. And building, somebody's mentioned trust and building that relationship, and Helen, you also alluded to it just now. It is critical, isn't it, to have a really strong relationship with a positive relationship with your teacher, with your educator, with the teaching assistant or learning support, whoever is having that close contact with them, and also that person then to be that advocate, and that person to know there are boundaries. I'm going to, we're going to know when things aren't right, but I'm on your side. And I think that is just critical, I think, across the board, really. Some of the things, of course, that we use in teaching and learning that to explore that and to help children to express their feelings, we might talk about what if. We might ask them to think and provoke curiosity and a keenness for children to think, to imagine, to contribute, to take an interest and enjoy, to share, to discuss, and ultimately to learn. Key learning indicators of cognitive, behavioural, socio-emotional and thinking skills enable learners to collaborate, to negotiate and communicate, as well as self-reflection skills, values and attitudes, motivations that enable learners to develop themselves, to learn about learning, that metacognition, that state of being ready to learn and being interested in it. And if there are things in our lives that are causing an imbalance in how we feel, then we are not ready to learn. And the things that we've talked about so far will, yes, we're still on that slide, don't worry. I'm just talking lots and lots around it. Sorry. We'll actually never be able to move on. But I'm going to move on now. Okay, so let's look at some strategies. Oh, why is that? Oh, it started talking to us. Interesting. Pre-recorded just in case something went wrong with the tech and it was deciding to talk over me. But what we are going to do, it's not, you can't hear it anymore, can you?
No, just you now.
Okay, lovely. Okay, so on here you can see some examples. So you could use some case studies to explore children, young people, how they express their feelings in ways that appear inappropriate. And I say appear inappropriate because we know they're inappropriate to the purpose of the classroom and the teaching and learning environment. But we can't say that children okay, can you not see the slides, Helen? I've just seen your, please move the slides.
Yes, no, the slides are moving.
Oh, okay. Okay. I think the messages are catching up with themselves, my end, I think.
Yeah.
So I think we need to think about what do we mean by inappropriate? Inappropriate to the situation from the member of staff's perspective. This is how that young person, how that learner is feeling. So we can use case studies to explore that. We can see emotional overload, those triggers, again, the importance of tuning in, having that positive relationship, knowing that individual really well. What do we know? What do we need to know? And how can we tune in to find out more? How can we adapt our teaching and learning environment? Critically important, and something that I don't think we have the time to do effectively at the moment, is how do we create a balance between the learning curriculum and the pastoral side of things, and how serious are we taking the pastoral curriculum? Being able to recognize emotional need in others, in each other. The jobs that you have are highly stressful, they're highly engaging and highly demanding. How do we recognize and what do we do to be able to regulate ourselves? And how do we co-regulate and support others? What do we know or what do we need to know about neuroscience? We're not going to be neuroscientists, but what we do understand is that we've got a lot of information out there that's been contextualized that will really help us to understand the connections between what's going on in the brain, the stress levels, and what's happening and how that's impacting our behavior, and therefore how can we adapt our teaching and learning. So we need to take time to do all of that to be able to understand it at a level that we can, and we need to share that with the people that we're teaching so that they too can begin to think, okay, and I'm in a state of emotional overload. This is happening. And maybe by helping them to understand what's going on, they can see ways to calm and to find a safe place and get back to that regulated environment. So to recap, the most important thing is what you do every single day. You tune in, you build relationships, and you get to know the learners that you're working with incredibly well. You get to know their behaviour, you get to know why things are happening, and you work with them. We need to find that balance, and we need to make sure we have the tools in our toolkit to be able to support the needs of the learners that we're working with. Ultimately, then, we can reap the rewards of that motivation and see participation and engagement with our learners. Okay, so we've come to the end of the Baubles of Behaviour, and of course we have touched upon just some very, very small aspects of that today. If anybody's got any questions, we do have a couple of minutes left, and I'm more than happy for you to raise any questions, or Helen, if there's anything else in the chat or anything you'd like to say about the evaluation forms.
Yeah. So I've popped the link to the evaluation into the chat there, and I think it would be really useful for us to do some longer work exploring classroom behaviour, but specific classroom strategies that teachers can use. I
Yes.
would be absolutely up for doing something based on my experience. I'm not going to say I was going to say my so much years of experience. I don't want to give away how old I am, but yeah, I think we need to dig a bit deeper into this topic as well and see how just
Yeah.
have some suggested strategies for people to try out.
Definitely, because what we could do, we've done kind of a bit of a broad picture, albeit in a
Yes.
short amount of time, and we could focus in maybe now, couldn't we, on certain certain features of behaviour and what we might see as inappropriate behaviour because it's inappropriate to our aim and our goal, but understanding and trying to understand, okay, so what do we do about this then?
Yeah, so the evaluation form does allow people to give us comments. So if you would like more training on this, if we've sparked an interest and you've decided that, oh yes, we'd love some more on this, please let us know that, and we can put this on in the next term. I think the general
Thank you,
consensus
Helen.
is yes, more work on the topic would be useful because we have just scratched the surface. So
Definitely.
yeah.
Such an interesting topic as well, and it's just so massive, isn't it? Massive.
It is. It is, but there's also a lot of support and guidance and theory out there related
Yes.
to managing challenging behaviour in the classroom.
Yeah.
Just for information, I mean, I did pop in the chat that I used to work for Bernardo's. They got us some training in called therapeutic crisis intervention, and it was
Yeah.
about working with any age of learner. So yeah, TCI. If anybody wants to do any research, therapeutic crisis intervention is the training that I'm referring to. But it's over 20 years ago that I did that now, so it'll have been updated, etc. So.
Excellent. Okay. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop the recording and just really want to say a